All right, so welcome to this deep dive into the world of Bob Camblin. This is going to be fun. We've got a whole stack of his quotes, some descriptions of his artwork, and even some commentary on his work. So, yeah, are you ready to try and figure out what makes this artist tick?
Oh, absolutely. Camblin is one of those figures you just can't easily put into a single category. He's
Yeah.
an artist, but he's also a thinker and a really keen observer of, the human condition.
All rolled into one, exactly.
Yeah.
And, one of his quotes really jumped out at me when I was reading through all this stuff. He says, "Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years, perhaps." I mean, come on, that is classic Camblin.
Oh, it really is. That quote really captures his unique way of combining wit and insight. You see that kind of thing throughout his work. Like he's saying, yeah, things change, but let's not take it all so seriously.
Exactly. And it kind of reminds me of something else in his work that really caught my attention. He mentions this thing called Salt Air Summer 1967. And he says, that's when we all aged. It feels like a riddle almost, like a shared memory that we're supposed to figure out.
Yeah, there's definitely something mysterious there. My first thought when I read that was, is this something personal for Camblin? Maybe some kind of turning point in his life. But then he uses the word we, implying this is like a collective experience.
Right. So maybe it's more of a cultural touchstone. Could it be like something that happened in 1967 that was really big? Something that maybe marked like, I don't know, a shift in society, like a loss of innocence or something.
Oh, that's a really interesting thought. 1967 was a pretty wild year,
Sure.
politically, socially. Yeah, a lot going on. It could be Camblin's way of commenting on all those changes that were happening all over the world at that time. Or maybe it's something totally different. Maybe it's a metaphor for that moment when you
Wow.
kind of transition, from being like an idealistic youth to having a more jaded worldview.
See, that's what I love about Camblin. He just keeps you guessing. And speaking of keeping us guessing, there's his whole concept of the perfectly average view of the universe, balancing science and magic. How do you even begin to wrap your head around that?
I know, right? This is classic Camblin. He doesn't want us to choose sides. He's suggesting there's this space, this place where logic and intuition, the seen and the unseen, can coexist. And not just coexist, but actually, make each other stronger, better somehow.
Mm. But how does that translate into his art? I mean, are we talking about paintings with like equations alongside fantastical creatures? Does he build robots out of fairy dust? What are we talking about here?
Not literally, no. But think about it this way. Science tries to understand the universe by looking at it closely and doing experiments. Magic, on the other hand, deals with stuff that, we don't quite get yet. It's beyond our current scientific understanding. But Camblin doesn't reject either approach. He's fascinated by what he calls the nuances of the smear between the whiteness and the blackness, as he puts it. He's saying truth isn't always just black or white, and that's where things get interesting. That's where the magic is.
Okay, so we're talking about finding that sweet spot, that balance between the rational and the intuitive,
That-
between the head and the heart, basically.
Exactly. It's about knowing that we don't have all the answers right now, but staying open to the possibilities, to what might be out there beyond what we can currently explain. It's about being okay with mystery.
Hmm. Which makes me think about another one of his quotes where he says, art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake. How does that fit in with the idea of this perfectly average view?
That's a really good question. I think it speaks to this idea that Camblin has that art shouldn't exist in a vacuum. It's not just about making something pretty or thought-provoking. It's about how art interacts with our lives, our experiences, how we understand the world. It's all connected.
He's pushing back against this idea that art is something separate from life, not just something that belongs in galleries and museums, right? He's saying that art has a deeper purpose, a function that goes beyond just looking good or making you think.
Exactly. And if we think about Camblin's work through this lens of the perfectly average view, you can see how he's trying to bridge the gap between the conceptual and the practical, between what you think about and what you actually experience and feel. He doesn't just want to create art. He wants it to mean something to people's lives. He wants it to matter.
And maybe that's why he's drawn to using so much symbolism. There's always more to unpack, more layers beneath the surface.
Absolutely. Symbolism allows him to communicate complex ideas in a way that grabs the viewer's imagination and lets them find their own interpretation. It's not just a one-way street.
And speaking of symbolism, we can't skip over Camblin's Salt Fork Ghost Catcher, a piece that is, well, just as interesting as its name suggests.
Oh, it really is. It's a piece that Just seems to sum up so much of Camblin's philosophy and artistic vision all in one.
From the descriptions we have, it sounds absolutely mesmerizing. You've got these ghostly figures that are almost translucent and they're kind of hovering near a plate of cherry pie. And then there's this crazy contraption full of gears and levers and all sorts of stuff designed to, well, I guess catch ghosts.
Right. And all of that is set against this backdrop of a window opening onto a vast landscape. It's really striking imagery. There's just so much to take in.
It almost feels like you could just step right into the painting and explore its world. So before we get too deep into what it all means, I'm just curious, what's your first reaction when you hear about the Salt Fork Ghost Catcher? What stands out to you?
Honestly, the first thing that hits me is the contrast. You have these ethereal, otherworldly figures right next to something as ordinary and familiar as a cherry pie. It's such a Camblin thing to do, blending the fantastic with the everyday. It's like he's saying you can find magic in the most ordinary things if you just know how to look.
I love that. And it makes me wonder, is the cherry pie itself a symbol for something deeper? Is it about like simple pleasures, enjoying the moment?
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that idea that Camblin was really into Zen Buddhism. Maybe the pie is about being present, about experiencing taste, really savoring the moment, almost like a meditation.
Right, because Zen is all about mindfulness, about being in the here and now. And the pie with its bright color and that delicious smell, it represents that. It's like Camelin is saying, hey, forget about chasing those ghosts, just enjoy this.
Right. But even with that invitation, the ghosts are still right there, almost close enough to touch the pie. Like they're a part of the whole experience, not something we can just ignore or pretend isn't there.
Yeah, which brings us to the ghost catcher itself. This big, elaborate contraption made to catch something you can't even really touch. What do you make of that?
Well, literally speaking, it's a pretty ridiculous idea, right? Like trying to put smoke in a bottle. But I think it's more about us trying to control the past, trying to make sense of it, put it in a box, maybe even deny it altogether.
There's definitely something futile about it, yeah. And maybe that's exactly Camblin's point. We can't erase the past, but we can choose how we approach it. We can try to control it, pick it apart, overthink it, or we can just accept it, acknowledge it, maybe even find a way to incorporate it into our present experience.
And maybe that's where the perfectly average view comes in again. Instead of seeing the past and present as two separate things, Camblin is suggesting we find a way to hold them both at the same time, to see them as connected, where each one shapes the other. Exactly. He's blurring the lines between science and magic, between thinking and feeling, the past and the present. He's showing us that life isn't about finding simple explanations, easy answers. It's about embracing all the complexity, the messiness, the stuff that doesn't quite fit.
Which reminds me, we haven't even talked about the moth with the red wing in the painting. That's got to be more than just a random detail, right?
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
In a lot of cultures, moths represent transformation, death and rebirth. And that red wing, it adds another layer, like a sense of urgency or passion or even danger.
Yeah, like a warning almost, like pay attention, this is important.
Right. And if we think about the moth together with the ghost catcher, it could represent how confronting our past can lead to growth and change. Maybe it's a guide showing us that even in the darkest places, transformation is always possible.
Wow, never thought about it that way. And then you've got that window in the background. It's like this portal to this huge open landscape. What's that all about?
I think it's a reminder that there's always more out there than just what we're experiencing right now. The ghost catcher, with all its gears and mechanisms, it represents how we get caught up in our own heads and our own feelings, feeling stuck in the past. But the window gives us a glimpse of something bigger. It reminds us there's a whole world out there to explore.
It's an invitation to step outside ourselves, to see things from a new perspective, to see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And it goes back to Camblin's idea of the perfectly average view. It's about balancing looking inward at ourselves with looking outward at the world around us. It's about being introspective, but also engaged with life.
So it's not just about ghosts. It's about how we approach everything in life. Are we stuck in the past? Or are we open to new experiences? Are we trying to control everything? Or are we willing to let go and just see where life takes us?
That's such a great way to put it. Camblin's art isn't just about making something pretty. It's about asking big questions that make us think about our own lives and how we choose to live them.
And the Salt Fort Ghost Catcher, with all its symbolism and layers of meaning, that seems to capture it perfectly.
It's like a miniature version of Camblin's whole worldview. It shows how art can be both beautiful and meaningful, fun and thought-provoking.
And speaking of thought-provoking, we haven't even touched on Camblin's thoughts on consumer art. He was really critical of the direction the art world was heading in back then.
Yeah, he was definitely worried about how much emphasis there was on novelty and trends, and how that was stifling real creativity and turning art into just another product.
There's this one quote where he says, "Making art has become like driving a car. All this skill and talent is required just to stay on the road." It really stuck with me.
Yeah, he felt like artists were being pressured to churn out work that was easy to understand, easy to sell, and easy to forget.
Right. It's almost like the focus shifted from the art itself to all the buzz around it. The artist becomes a brand, and the artwork is just another product to sell.
Yeah, exactly. And Camlin felt like that was going against what art should really be about, which is expressing something real, something that connects with people on a deeper level.
He felt like the focus on shock value and newness was obscuring all those other more subtle, nuanced parts of art. The beauty, the emotions, the need to think and contemplate.
He was concerned that art was losing its soul, becoming just a hollow imitation of what it used to be.
But even though he was critical of the art world, he never gave up on the power of art itself. He believed it could still be a force for good, a
Yeah.
way to create change, a way to help us understand the world around us.
He saw art as a form of resistance, a way of pushing back against conformity and consumerism.
He urged artists to be true to themselves, to create work that mattered to them, regardless of what the market might want.
He believed that real art could go beyond trends and fads and speak to people across time and cultures, and that it could touch something deep inside the human spirit.
And maybe that's Bob Camblin's legacy. He wasn't just a talented artist, he was a visionary, someone who challenged us to rethink what art is, what life is, and how we fit into it all.
He showed us that it's okay to be different, to embrace the things that are unconventional, to find beauty in the unexpected.
He reminded us that true art comes from the heart, not from the marketplace, and that even in a world obsessed with newness and trends, there's still room for something with more depth, something that truly means something.
And that's why his work still resonates with us today. It speaks to that part of us that wants something real, something that connects us to something bigger than ourselves, something that goes beyond the surface and the temporary.
He's like a wise friend who guides us through all the confusing thoughts and emotion that we have, reminding us that it's okay to feel lost sometimes, and that the journey is just as important as where you end up.
And that sometimes you find the most profound truths in the most unexpected places, like on a plate of cherry pie under a ghost-catching machine.
And that takes us right back to that mysterious quote we started with. Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years perhaps. What do you think Camblin meant by that?
It's hard to say for sure, but maybe it's his way of recognizing how paradoxical life is. Things change, everything is temporary, but there's still something lasting about the human spirit, our capacity for awe, for beauty, for connection.
Maybe he's saying that even though the world around us is constantly changing, there are certain truths, certain values, certain experiences that stay with us.
Maybe it's a reminder to enjoy the present moment, to savor the sweetness of life, knowing that nothing lasts forever, but the memory of those precious moments can stay with us long after they're gone.
That's a beautiful thought, and I think it perfectly captures the essence of Bob Camblin, an artist who could find the extraordinary in the ordinary and meaning in the playful.
He was truly a master of combining opposites, weaving dreams, and making us think.
He was one of a kind, and his work continues to inspire and challenge us today. And I have a feeling his work will keep speaking to people for a long time to come.
I think you're right. There's something timeless about what he observed and the themes he explored. They go beyond any particular time period or artistic movement.
He speaks to the core of what it means to be human. Our shared experiences of joy and sadness, longing and belonging, the search for meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and meaningless.
And he does it with a sense of humor and whimsy that makes his work both easy to understand and deeply profound. He's like that wise old friend who shares his insights with a twinkle in his eye, inviting us to go on a journey of discovery with him.
So to our listeners out there, if you're curious about what you heard today, I really encourage you to dive into Camblin's world, explore his artwork, think about his words, and see what aha moments you might find. You might even discover a little something about yourself along the way.
And remember what Camlin said. Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years perhaps.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep that Camblin spirit alive.
So we're back to this Salt Fork ghost catcher. We were talking about those ghosts and what they might symbolize. It's easy to just see them as representing the past. But I think Camblin wants us to dig a little deeper.
Deeper, huh? What exactly do we mean by the past, then? Everybody's got one.
Right. And it's not just about specific events. It's more about like the weight of the past in general, how it influences who we are today, how it can either hold us back or push us forward. The ghosts could represent regrets, mistakes, mischances, all that stuff we carry around with us, sometimes without even realizing it.
The cherry pie is starting to make even more sense now. Camplin was really into Zen Buddhism, wasn't he? Maybe that pie is about being present in the moment, focusing on the taste, the experience, like a kind of meditation almost.
Yeah, it's a great connection. Zen is all about mindfulness, about being fully present. And that pie, with its bright red color and delicious smell, it's like a symbol of that present moment. It's almost as if Campbell is saying, hey, look, stop worrying about the past. Just enjoy this.
But even with that invitation, those ghosts are still there, right next to the pie. Like they're part of the experience, not something you can just ignore or erase.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the ghost catcher itself. This whole elaborate contraption built to catch something you can't even touch. What do you think about that?
Well, if you think about it literally, it seems kind of absurd, right? Like trying to catch smoke in a jar. So I think it's more about our attempts to control the past, to make sense of it, try to categorize it, maybe even try to deny it altogether.
There is a definite sense of futility to it, isn't there? Maybe that's Camlin's point. We can't just get rid of the past, but we can choose how we deal with it. We can try to control it, analyze it, overanalyze it even, or we can just accept it for what it is, acknowledge it, maybe even find a way to make it part of our present.
And maybe that's where the perfectly average view comes back in, too. Instead of seeing the past and present as two completely separate things, Camlin wants us to find a way to see them both at the same time, to see how they're connected, how they influence each other.
Exactly. He's blurring the lines between science and magic, the rational and the intuitive, the past and the present. He's showing us that life isn't about finding simple explanations and clear-cut answers. It's about embracing the complexity, the messiness, the contradictions.
Which reminds me, we haven't talked about that moth with the red wing in the painting. That can't just be a random detail, can it?
Oh, no, definitely not. In many cultures, moths symbolize transformation, like death and rebirth. And that red wing, it adds another layer of meaning, like a sense of urgency, maybe passion, even a little danger.
Almost like a warning, right? Like, hey, pay attention, this is important.
Right. And if we think about the moth in the context of the ghost catcher, it could symbolize the potential for growth that comes from facing our past. Maybe it's like a guide, showing us that even in the darkest times, there's always a chance for change and transformation.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. And then you've got that window in the background opening onto this wide open landscape. What's the significance of that, do you think?
I think it reminds us that there's always something bigger out there than just what we're focused on in the moment. That ghost catcher, with all its complicated gears and mechanisms, it represents how we get caught up in our own thoughts and feelings and end up feeling trapped by our past. But that window offers a glimpse of something bigger. It reminds us that there's a whole world out there waiting to be explored.
It's like an invitation to get out of our own heads, to look at things from a different perspective, to see the bigger picture.
Exactly. It goes back to Camlin's idea of the perfectly average view again. It's about balancing looking inward at ourselves with looking outward at the world, being introspective and engaged with life at the same time.
So it's not really just about the ghosts, it's about our whole approach to life. Are we dwelling on the past? Or are we open to new experiences? Are we trying to control everything? Or are we willing to let go and see where life takes us?
You put it perfectly. Campbell's art isn't just about pretty pictures. It's about asking these really important questions, questions that make us reflect on our own lives and the choices we make.
And the Salt Fort Ghost Catcher, with all its layers of symbolism and meaning, really sums that up, doesn't it?
It's like a mini version of Camblin's whole philosophy, a testament to his belief that art can be beautiful and thought-provoking, playful and profound, all at the same time.
Speaking of thought-provoking, we haven't even touched on Camblin's thoughts on what he called consumer art. He had some pretty strong opinions about where the art world was headed in his time.
Yeah, he was definitely worried about all the emphasis on what's new and trendy. He felt like it was choking out real creativity and turning art into just another product to be bought and sold.
I remember this one quote that really resonated with me. He said, "Making art has become like driving a car. All the skill and talent is needed just to stay on the road."
It's a great quote. He felt like artists were being pressured to churn out work that was easy to digest, easy to sell, and easy to forget.
It's like the focus shifted from the art itself to all the hype and marketing surrounding it. The artist becomes a brand, the artwork just another product.
Exactly. And Camlin saw that as a betrayal of what art should be, something genuine, something that connects with people on a deeper level.
He felt like the focus on shock value and novelty was drowning out the more subtle and nuanced aspects of art. The beauty, the emotion, the need to think and contemplate.
He was worried that art was losing its soul, becoming an empty shell of what it used to be.
But even though he was critical of the art world, he never lost his faith in the power of art. He still believed that art could be a positive force, something that could bring about change, help us understand the world around us.
He saw art as a form of resistance, a way to push back against the pressures of conformity and consumerism.
He really encouraged artists to stay true to their own vision, to create work that was meaningful to them, regardless of what the market might dictate.
He believed that true art could go beyond trends and fads and speak to people across time and cultures, that it could tap into something deep within the human spirit.
And maybe that's Bob Camblin's true legacy. He wasn't just a talented artist, but a visionary. Someone who pushed us to look at art, life, and our place in the universe in a whole new way.
He showed us that it's okay to be different, to embrace what's unconventional, to find beauty in the unexpected.
He reminded us that true art comes from the heart, not from the marketplace. And that even in a world obsessed with what's new and trendy, there's still space for something deeper, something more meaningful.
And that's why his work still resonates with us today. It speaks to that part of us that longs for something real, something that connects us to something bigger than ourselves, something that goes beyond the superficial and temporary.
He's like that wise friend who gently guides us through all our confusing thoughts and feelings, reminding us that it's okay to feel lost sometimes, and that it's the journey, not just the destination, that matters.
And that sometimes you find the most profound truths in the most unexpected places, like a plate of cherry pie beneath a ghost-catching machine.
That brings us right back to that mysterious quote we started with. Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years perhaps. What do you think Camblin meant by that?
It's tough to say for sure, but maybe it was his way of acknowledging the paradoxes of life. Everything changes, nothing stays the same, but there's something enduring about the human spirit, our ability to experience awe and beauty and connection.
Maybe he's saying that even though the world is always changing, there are certain truths, certain values, certain experiences that have a timeless quality to them.
Maybe it's a reminder to just be present in the moment, to enjoy the sweetness of life, knowing that nothing lasts forever. But the memory of those moments can stay with us long after they're gone.
I think that's a beautiful sentiment. It really captures the essence of Bob Camblin, an artist who found the extraordinary in the ordinary, and who found meaning in playfulness.
He really was a master of blending opposites, a weaver of dreams, someone who really made you think.
He was truly one of a kind, and his work continues to inspire us and challenge us even today. And I have a feeling his work will keep speaking to people for generations to come.
I think so too. There's a timeless quality to his observations, a universality to his themes that goes beyond any specific time or art movement.
He spoke to the human condition, to our shared experiences of joy and sorrow, of longing and belonging, of our search for meaning in a world that can often feel chaotic and absurd.
He did it with a wit and a sense of whimsy that make his work both accessible and profound. He's like a wise old friend, sharing his insights with a twinkle in his eye, inviting us to join him on this journey of discovery.
So to our listeners out there, if you're at all intrigued by what you've heard today, I encourage you to dive deeper into Camblin's world, explore his art, think about his words, and see what aha moments you might find. Who knows, you might even discover something about yourself along the way.
And remember what Camblin said. Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years perhaps.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that Camblin spirit alive.
You know, it's funny, as we've been talking about all this, I keep thinking about that idea of the perfectly average view. It seems so simple at first, but then you start thinking about it more and it gets really deep.
It really does. It feels like it sums up so much of Camblin's philosophy. His whole approach to life. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between the extremes, between what we can see and what we can't see, logic and intuition.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about finding some kind of middle ground. It's about embracing the tension between those opposite forces, right? Realizing that life isn't always about finding simple answers or putting things into neat little boxes.
Totally. It's about being okay with not knowing everything, with mystery. And it's about finding beauty in those unexpected places, the imperfections, the stuff that doesn't quite fit in.
Absolutely. And I think that's a big part of what makes Camblin's work so timeless. He doesn't shy away from the complicated parts of life. He just dives right in. He shows us it's okay to question things, to doubt, to even get lost sometimes.
Right, he reminds us that it's not always about the destination, it's about the journey. And sometimes those wrong turns, those detours, those are the times we discover the most interesting stuff.
Absolutely. And there's this one quote of his that really captures that for me. He says, I didn't learn anything new, but I know a lot more now. It's like true knowledge isn't just about collecting a bunch of facts. It's about making connections, seeing things in a new light.
It's about those aha moments, those sudden shifts in perspective that change how you see everything. And Camblin's art is full of those moments. He's always pushing us to look beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, to see the world with fresh eyes.
He was so good at making us think, at sparking our curiosity, at leading us down these rabbit holes of ideas and wonder. And even when you come out the other side, you're never quite the same.
You're right. You've been touched by his vision, his sense of humor, his humanity. You've caught a glimpse of something profound, something that resonates deep down inside.
And maybe that's the real sign of a successful artist. Not the awards, not how much money they make, but the impact their work has on the people who experience it.
The way it changes how we see the world, how it inspires us to think and feel and create.
Camblin definitely achieved that. He left behind this amazing legacy that still inspires and challenges us today. And honestly, I have a feeling his work will keep speaking to people for a long, long time.
I think you're right. There's this timelessness to his observations, this universal quality to his themes that goes beyond any specific time or art movement.
He really captured something about the human experience.
Sure.
Our joys and sorrows, that feeling of wanting to belong, the search for meaning in a world that can often feel kind of chaotic and absurd.
And he did it all with this wit and this whimsy that makes his work both easy to grasp and deeply profound. He's like that wise old friend who shares his wisdom with a twinkle in his eye and invites you to come along with him on this adventure of discovery.
Exactly. So to all our listeners out there, if you're curious about Camblin and his work, I really encourage you to go explore it for yourself. Check out his art, spend some time with his words, and see what kind of aha moments you discover. You never know. You might learn something new about yourself along the way.
And don't forget what Camblin said. Fortunately, some things remain forever or another 10 years perhaps.
Wise words.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep that Camblin spirit alive.